Welcome to Pretty Lies and Alibis. Let's seek the truth and travel the long road to justice together. What you know, Alibis, welcome to another episode of Pretty Lies and Alibis. I'm Gigi with my low country, humid, been raining all day hairdo, but there it is. I'm just going natural. So, huge day in the Alex Murdaugh double murder trial. We'll get to that in just a second. I got to thank some donors real quick. Dawn, very generous donation. Thank you very much. Suzanne, Lynn, Dana, Erica, Rebby, Suzanne, Pam, and Liz. You guys are amazing. Really appreciate your generosity. It means a lot. So, music fact of the day before we get it started. Walk This Way by Run DMC and Aerosmith. It's just one of those songs. Every time I hear it, I crank it wide open. It's just great. But at the time in the 80s, Run DMC was just on top of their game. They were one of the top selling rap hip hop artists, but MTV was not featuring a lot of rap or hip hop. So Def Jam Records co-founder Rick Rubin, he kind of wanted to see Run DMC reach that success on MTV. And so they had been sampling the 1975 Aerosmith hit Walk This Way. So they got in touch with Aerosmith. By the way, Run DMC had no clue who Aerosmith was. And Steven Tyler said it wound up being so magical. The director, John Small, who gets little to no credit, by the way, decided to put Run DMC on one side, Aerosmith on the other, and then there'll be a wall and they'll cut out a piece of that wall. And the whole idea was to show that rock and roll and hip hop could live happily together. And it did. And it just is a great song. So there you go. All right. So first of all, the live Q&A today for an hour on Law and Crime Network, I had a blast. We're going to do that about every day. So whenever we go to lunch break, go over to Law and Crime's YouTube channel, on TV on the network. And I believe they had it on Facebook today, Twitch, all those places. Check it out. Had an awesome time answering your questions. We're going to do that throughout the trial. So we knew today could be the day they get the jury. We were not expecting how quickly. At first, we heard it was 123, then it was 80, then it was, oh yeah, we got the jury. And by the way, openings are going to start at 3. So I kind of thought maybe they would just go home, get a good night's sleep, come back fresh tomorrow. Nope. I mean, head first in today. So what do we know about like before? Well, who was there for Alec? So his surviving son, Buster, was there. A lot of people wondered if he would come, but he did. His girlfriend, Alec's brothers, John, Marvin, Randy, and his sister, Liz, and his niece, and then a couple of the spouses were there as well. And so what's interesting, John, Marvin, Buster, and Liz are all on the defense witness list, with Randy being on the state's list. So we're only allowed in once the jury has been seated, and the family came in after all of us had been seated. Alec turned around, looked directly at Buster, said, "I love you," asked him if he was okay. He kind of went down the line, made eye contact, smiled. And so then the judge gave the normal instructions to the jury. So Creighton Waters was up first for the state, and he says, on June 7th, 2021, Paul Murdaugh was standing in the small feed room at some kennels they have on the property. At 8:50, the defendant, Alex Murdaugh, took a 12-gauge shotgun and shot him in the chest. It was a 1,000,000-to-1 shot. He could have survived that, but another shot went up under his head, and there was catastrophic damage to his brain and his head. And Paul collapsed right outside of that feed room. Moments later, he picked up a .300 blackout type of ammo and an AR-style rifle. The evidence will show the family had multiple weapons throughout the property. By the way, they had a gun room, like a whole room for guns. And he picked up the AR rifle and opened fire on Maggie just feet away from the shed that used to be a hangar. That was like an airstrip, the Moselle property. And then he went pow, pow. 2 shots in the abdomen and leg took her down. Then there were 2 shots to the head that did catastrophic damage that killed her instantly. Neither Paul nor Maggie had defensive wounds, and they did not see the threat coming. Both Maggie and Paul were shot at extremely close range, and the evidence is going to show stippling, which he says is like a tattoo that the pathologist can see and that can tell that was close proximity. So Alec told anyone who would listen he was not at those kennels. So at this point, he pulls out a cell phone from his pocket and puts it up in the air. And he said, but the evidence will show this thing that most of us carry around in our pockets, that he was there at the kennels. He was there with Maggie and Paul just minutes before their cell phones go silent forever. At this point, Creighton Waters introduces himself, co-counsel, as well as some of the investigators who were sitting in the back of the room that eventually will testify. And he talks about the murder indictments, and also the possession of a firearm during a violent crime. He explains to the jury that the murder charge is the unlawful killing of another with malice forethought. And he said malice is the mental state. What was going through Alex's mind when he committed these crimes? It's the intent to inflict an injury under circumstances that the law would presume an evil intent. He said, when you look at this crime, the circumstances that led up to the crime, you will find malice forethought. Now, I will say, anytime to me that I looked at, because I was sitting behind Buster, me and Elizabeth, the producer, we both were sitting in, and we were probably 4 rows behind Buster and the whole family, but also there's a big pathway through that. So we weren't super close, but you could see Buster put his head down a lot when they talked about Paul. So he said, malice forethought, it doesn't have to be planned. It has to exist for a split second before the crime is committed. The evidence will show that forethought existed for a while in the mind of Alex Murdaugh. You're going to hear about circumstantial evidence, and the law says circumstantial evidence is just as good as direct evidence. So he gives an example of rain outside, which it was doing as we were listening to these opening statements, by the way. You go inside and it was raining. So you get on the witness list and you can say, hey, I saw it was raining outside. That's direct evidence. Circumstantial is if the witness goes in a room, all the curtains are pulled, it was sunny outside when they went in, but then you hear thunder and you hear the wind blowing and then you hear the rain on the roof and you go outside and it's not raining, but there's puddles everywhere. The street's wet. They come in here, get on the witness stand, and they say it rained. And then he gave the example. You could say somebody was outside the window beating a drum and, but what the comparison I thought is a good one. And I've heard that analogy before. Ultimately, he said the jury would determine the credibility of that witness. So video evidence, you're going to see video statements of Alec. You'll see and hear 3 different body cam videos of him at the scene when law enforcement arrived. You're going to hear 3 recorded statements about what he did that night. Listen closely to what he's saying. Listen to what he's not saying. Watch closely, watch his expressions, and use your common sense. Does something seem a little off? By the way, here is Buster coming in with his family, and, it was sort of, he was getting chased apparently by all the media because it was just such a question of whether or not he was going to be there. So he goes to Christmas of 2017 and he says Alec bought 2 300 blackout AR style rifles. One of those went missing from Paul's truck. So in April of 2018, Alec bought another. Paul and his friend used that replacement gun. He said they were standing outside the gun room. They were firing down into a field. Casings were ejected out of the gun. And then they also have a gun range across the street. But he said when they were standing there shooting into the field, the casings went into a flower bed. And this is just weeks prior to the murder, by the way. So at the range across the street, they found casings as well. He said, you're going to hear the casings found in the flower bed and at the firing range. And those cases were fired from the same weapon that were all around Maggie's dead body. The family gun that killed her. He bought 3 of those guns he can account for one. The replacement gun, gone. The same ammo, same brand, same model found all over the property for the assault rifle and the shotgun. So we know that Alex's dad died 3 days after the murders, and his mom is in end stage of Alzheimer's. And I just read the other day that her condition has worsened. And he says about a week after the murder, Alex shows up at his parents' house carrying a blue tarp, which it's uncharacteristic for him to show up early. So he puts it upstairs. Well, eventually, law enforcement gets that and finds it's a wadded up large blue raincoat. What's inside that blue raincoat? Coated gunshot residue. Now, I will tell you, I have heard about this for quite a while, and I guess it's true. There was gunshot residue on Alec at the scene. They found it on the seatbelt of his car. So when officers arrived on scene, he had went and got Paul's shotgun, and Maggie and Paul's DNA was on that shotgun. So he holds up the cell phone again, and he says the key piece of evidence you are going to hear in this case is the cell phone. Alec, Maggie, and Paul. Keeps track of everything, as we know, who you're talking to, who you're texting, where you're going, what apps you're accessing. Some of those pings into your GPS. It allows us to piece together what someone was doing and who they were interacting with. And he says this will be crucial evidence. Now, if you follow the Lori Vallow Chad Daybell case, you know that is how they found the location of JJ and Tylee's bodies by Alex Cox's cell phone. His Google was signed in and it pinged within meters of both burial sites. So I'm curious to see what's going to come in this case. So Alec, Paul, and Maggie were huge cell phone users, as we all are, though. Come on, that's not odd. The properties they have, Moselle, large, lots of acres, used to be an airstrip. It's about a third of a mile away from the kennels and the former hangar where the bodies were found. The family also had a house in Edisto. That's where Maggie supposedly preferred to stay, especially in the summer. She's not a hunter. She liked the beach. She didn't want to be at Moselle where there's a lot of bugs and it's just sticky hot, right? If you're in the South, you know what I mean. The low country, the upstate, anywhere in South Carolina, it gets sticky hot. And also his parents' home, his mom had a caretaker. You're going to hear from that caretaker. So the main house has a driveway, and then there's a driveway to the kennels that was commonly used as just a regular driveway. And he said, in fact, the mailbox is right by the kennels. So on June 7th, Maggie came to Moselle at 8:15 p.m. and Paul was at the main house. Alex said they ate dinner, and the autopsy will reflect the stomach contents, showing Maggie and Paul ate a similar dinner together. So at 8:30, Paul's phone moves towards the kennels. Alex said he wasn't at the kennel. He was taking a nap. But at 8:44 p.m., Paul recorded a video at the kennel about a friend's dog that he was worried about. Something was wrong with that dog's tail, and he sent that video to his friend. Now, I'm just going to go ahead and give you a trigger warning because it kind of pops in and out. It's very graphic the way they describe these gunshot wounds to both Paul and Maggie. And it's just unavoidable. It's the murders. It's why we're here. So if things like that bother you, I'm just warning you. I'm going to tell you what was said in court today, and it's not pleasant. So Alex said he was taking a nap. 8:44, Paul records that video about his friend's dog. But on that video, you're going to hear the voices of Paul, Maggie, and Alec at the murder scene. 3 minutes after that video with Alec at the murder scene, Paul's phone locks down for good. No calls, no texts ever again. At 8:49 p.m., just a few minutes later, he gets a text from his friend, from the friend with that dog. That goes unanswered. At 8:49, Maggie's phone completely stops as well. You'll hear it was unusual for Alec not to have a cell phone, But his phone doesn't show any activity from 8:09 p.m. to 9:02 p.m. At 9:02 p.m., his phone becomes active again. At 9:04, he calls Maggie's phone, no answer. He calls his dad, no answer. At 9:06, he calls Maggie. 9:06, the same time, he cranks his car and texts Maggie, be right back, gonna go check on mom. Now, what the prosecutor points out, he doesn't drive to the kennels. It's right there. He says you can see them from the house. The defense disputes that. But he says, Maggie hasn't responded. Why don't you just drive down there? And he drives to his mom. So he calls people on the way. He said it's going to be up to you guys to decide, was he establishing an alibi? The caretaker is there with mom. You'll hear him coming there was unusual at that time. And you'll also hear about how he was acting. 9:44 p.m., he's on his way back to Moselle, but he's calling friends. At 10:01, back at the property, the 911 call comes in at 10:06 p.m. And now it's time for our paid sponsor of the week, Base. The Base Weekender Bag is my new go-to for short or long trips. As you guys know, I'm on assignment now covering a trial away from home, and the Weekender Bag has so much space. I actually cut down the number of bags I usually carry from 3 to 1. It even has padded space for your laptop. Are you like me and misplace your keys while on vacation? The Weekender Bag has a clip inside to make sure you don't lose your keys while traveling. You got dirty clothes or shoes? Not a problem. The Weekender Bag has a separate compartment on the bottom that's separate from the main compartment. The material is durable and the shoulder strap is super comfortable even when the bag is full. There are so many little nooks and crannies for all your travel needs. The bag comes in stylish colors and I chose navy. The Weekender Bag was actually created by actress Shay Mitchell, and she really thought of everything a frequent traveler needs. The Weekender Bag even fits in the overhead compartment on planes. In fact, I've ordered 2 for my parents for their upcoming cruise after they fell in love with mine. Make your packing more efficient and stylish with the Base Weekender Bag. And guess what? Base has over 30,000 5-star reviews. So what are you waiting for? Even better, right now, Base is offering my listeners 15% off your first purchase by visiting basetravel.com/whattheworld. Go to basetravel.com/whattheworld for 15% off your first purchase. That's base, BEIS travel.com/whattheworld. On the body-worn cam, you're going to see what he did to Maggie and Paul, and it's going to be gruesome. Crime scene photos, gruesome. 911 call and body cam. Pay attention to the explanations he may offer. Within a few seconds of law enforcement arriving on scene, he says this is about the boat case. You're going to hear about a perfect storm that was gathering. Things happened that very day to him. We know just that morning his own law firm approached him about missing money. It's been a long, exhausting investigation, and it's going to be a long trial. It's a journey. Piece it together, and then a picture emerges. A murdered Maggie and Paul. He was the storm, and it was coming for them. So that was the state's openings. So we get Harpootlian up. He says, it's an honor to represent Alex Murdaugh. I keep wanting to say Murdaugh because I'm Southern, y'all. Sorry. It's Alec. I would call him Alec if I weren't doing this. That's just how we say it. Murdaugh is how we say it in the South, but I'm going to say Murdaugh because that's how Alec pronounces his last name. He says, it's an honor to represent Alex Murdaugh. What you heard from the Attorney General as facts, they're not. There's theories. He asks Alec to stand up, and he does, and he faces the jury. He's a very tall man. He's got to be 6'3", 6'4", easy. He said he was the loving father of Paul and the loving husband of Maggie. You won't hear their relationship was anything other than loving. We've heard different in speculation or from sources that it was collapsing, but we will see. He said, you're going to hear they went to a baseball game the week before. You're going to see texts and emails indicating a loving relationship. He called Paul the apple of his eye. You're going to see a video of Paul and Alec at 7:30 riding around looking at the trees they planted. Paul took a Snapchat. We know that's coming in. And Waters says this is crucial to the case. They're riding around looking at the trees they planted. They're having a good time and they're laughing. But here's my question. I thought he was asleep at that time. I thought he was asleep, woke up, went to his mom's. But hey, this is an hour before the murders. He explains the shots to Paul and said, and I'm going to throw up a picture of Alec here. This was kind of his expression when this is being explained. And trigger warning, he said the shots to Paul, the headshot exploded his head like a watermelon hit with a sledgehammer. All that was left was the front of his face. And his brain went up to the ceiling and landed at his feet. He says it's not believable that an hour after the Snapchat where they're laughing and having fun that he slaughtered them. Maggie was shot while running. One bullet hit her brain, and the perpetrator walked up behind her and put one in the back of her head. We don't know why. Alec left at 9:06 and returned at 10:01. And after seeing his mom, his dad's dying and put in the hospital later than usual. That's why. His father dies 2 days later. He says the cell phone records are incomplete because Maggie's phone was thrown out of the road a quarter or a half a mile away from the home. He said, how did they find it? Find my iPhone. Then he says, who gave him the code to open that phone? Alec did that. As the car, I guess the word is like the, like the GPS that shows what the car is doing. I mean, you have a fancy car. It shows the car being cranked. At the same time, her phone is being thrown on the side of the road almost a half a mile away. How does that happen? He calls it magic. He said the photos of the bodies of Maggie and Paul still shock him. He comes home, meaning Alec, finds his son with his brain laying at his feet, shot, quote, shot to hell. He checks to see if they're alive. Obviously, he says Paul's not alive. His brain is there by his feet. Man, he checks for a pulse on Maggie. He calls 911 and he's hysterical with grief. He drives back up to the house. He says, you can't see the shed from the home, maybe the top of it. He says there's pine trees, and he said it's not unusual for any of them to use their cell phones to communicate, even if they're on the same property, because it's so massive. He wants actually the jury to go to the Moselle property so that they can get an idea of these locations, which will be interesting to see if that happens. He said their witnesses will talk about the catastrophic injuries to Paul. The shooter was 3 feet or so away. He said you would be covered head to toe in blood if you were the one that shot him. He said Sled took his clothes. There's no blood on him, and their testing indicated 12 places on his shirt, no blood detected. He said the reason we're here today, I got to say, because Alec went and got a shotgun. He gets a 12-gauge shotgun and shells, and he gets a 12-gauge buckshot and a 16-gauge buckshot. And he says that's how shook up he is. He's a hunter. He's been doing this for years. You can't fire a 16-gauge with a 12-gauge. He said that's how flustered and upset he was. And he goes back to the scene in case the perpetrator is still around. Gunshot residue. Sled says the amount of gunshot residue is consistent with him picking up that gun. If you fired those 2 guns, you would be covered, and that's a fact. And that's where we're going to have a little bit of back and forth, I think, when that jacket is introduced. So he says the ARs, let's talk about the guns. They have a gun room, a lot of guns. In 2017, Alec bought 2 blackouts, one for Paul and one for Buster. He said, who is sitting in this courtroom? Paul had his stolen. He bought another one for Paul. And he said Paul was very irresponsible with guns, cars. He'd leave guns in cars or down at the dog pens in the feed room. And he said, I can't say if he was shot with his own gun, but I can tell you they weren't shot by Alec. They don't have the guns. Why is it that they're shot in June of 2021 and Alec isn't charged until September of 2022? He said law enforcement shows up. He has a shotgun. The next morning on the news, 2 people found butchered, blown up. The police say there's no danger to the community because they decided that night he did it. They've been pounding that square peg into that round hole since June of 2021. He says it doesn't matter if he went to the kennels that night. I mean, it kind of does matter if you say you weren't there shortly before the murders and you did go. But he said Paul's phone at 8:50 ceases, Maggie's at 8:54. At 9:06, he's up at the house cranking his car to see his mom. He would have had to have executed them both, get to the house, get off the bloody clothes. He said, in fact, he gave law enforcement permission to search his house. And according to the defense, they got a search warrant and did just that. And he says, where are the bloody clothes? There's no eyewitnesses, no forensics tying him to the murders, such as fingerprints or DNA. There's audio of him and Maggie talking about the dog killing a chicken. No animosity. After that, Paul's texting a girl about going to the movies later. Nobody's threatening him. Then he says 1 shooter or 2 guns. That's where I think maybe the defense is going to try to get that reasonable doubt in there. Because also Paul was shot with 2 different types of shotgun shells, I believe. He says, what's Maggie running from? She has no defensive wounds. Maybe she heard the gunshot blast and saw 1 or 2 people. Was there enough time to kill Paul, then find the AR and ambush Maggie? He says most likely there were 2 shooters. Then he talks about Alec being presumed innocent. He said, you see a story talking about the jurors. You see a story on the news of a brutal murder, and then you find out they've arrested somebody and you think, oh, wow, great. We're safer now. They've got this person in custody. He said, you assume they arrested the person who committed the crime. He said, that's natural. We all do that. He said, it's good to do that any day except for today. He said, the law says Alex Murdaugh is presumed innocent. He said, the smoke they created is about suspicion. If you show up and the wife is dead and he's holding a shotgun or he has a shotgun, it's easy to assume he did it. He said they've ignored some witnesses. The blue tarp, that witness was shown a blue rain jacket and said that is not what he brought here that morning. Now, there was an objection. It was sustained and stricken from the record. So every witness from the state, you get to judge the credibility of that witness, evaluate that testimony, use your common sense. So he goes on to say he is innocent. He didn't do it. You were picked because Alex Murdaugh believes you can be fair. He also said, if I say something that offends you, blame me, not Alex Murdaugh. And so he asked the jury to find him not guilty at the end of this trial. So it was interesting being in there today. I love sitting in on trials. I love watching the body language of everybody, the jurors. The jurors were very, very focused on both sides. And it was interesting because when Alex stood up and looked at that jury, there were some jury members who kind of looked away, just didn't want to make any kind of eye contact, whether it's just being in a weird position. All of a sudden you're, part of a huge jury pool, and now you're sitting there and you're going to decide if this man brutally murdered his wife and son. I don't know. But the jurors today were very engaged in openings, 100%. They were hanging on every word. But I did notice a couple of people get uncomfortable when he turned and faced that jury. And I think that's one thing he's good at. And I saw it yesterday during jury selection, is that eye contact of I see you and making his notes. And I think that's very much a lawyer mode. But he was wiping, some tears at one point. And I think that, everybody's got their opinions, and Buster was there and his dad at the end, because what happened was they were talking about calling a witness, and it has to do with those first responders on the scene. So it seems like tomorrow the jury's really going to start seeing those gruesome pictures when they walk into that dog kennel and then just 30 yards away from where Paul was. But there was an audio issue. And so they're supposed to be fixing that overnight. So tomorrow it's going to be a member of probably local law enforcement with the body worn camera, and then see the very, very, very graphic crime scene photos, which I just read Judge Newman has sealed. Those will not be made public. And I'm not sure that most of us would want to see that. It sounds like Paul's body was just almost obliterated here. They said nearly decapitated. But yeah, so it was exciting to sit in for openings. I think it's going to be a very, very interesting trial. 2 to 3 weeks or so is the judge's words. It just depends. Now, remember, there are some outstanding motions that we've got to hear during the course of the trial that will be argued outside of the jury's presence. So who knows how long those arguments can take. It's about the blood spatter is one. And what was the other one? My little tired brain's like, we need to upload this and go to bed. What was the other one? Oh my gosh. Okay. So anyways, but there's still some outstanding motions that have to be heard when they are coming up in the trial. So 2 to 3 weeks. We're just now on day 3, but I have to say, this is my new home. I'm missing my kids and my Grammy, but they're in good hands. Family all around, taking care of everybody. I'm in constant contact with everybody. So it's not like I'm really gone. The kids are probably enjoying the break a little bit, maybe. But I hear Grammy's feeling better and she's micromanaging, which makes me feel great. So anyways, tomorrow we'll start out with this body cam footage. I'm going to be looking at that jury to see their reactions to these photos. It's going to be devastating stuff to look at. And so anyways, that's all from openings. Thank you guys so much for the kind comments online. You guys have been amazing. This is a very new thing for me. I've never done this until Monday of this week. And so I'm starting to get a little more comfortable, but still really nervous. But thank you guys for the kind comments. Welcome to all the new followers. And yeah, so this is kind of what I do is I take the day's testimony for those of you who can't watch or don't want to watch 8 hours of testimony. I break it down into an hour so you don't miss a thing. So follow me throughout this trial. Share it with your friends. If you know somebody who works that can't watch, that doesn't just want to read a little news article or a little 3-minute spot on the news, tell them I got them covered right here. And we'll see you tomorrow. Until then, you guys be good. You girls going to bed. Have a good one.